Hey everyone, Mr. Walker here. This lesson is going to be on the heart structure, heart anatomy, where you find in the heart what is called oxygenated and deoxygenated blood flow through the heart, the cardiac cycle, and a little bit on electrical activity of the heart as well. So we'll start out with some heart anatomy, and I have a picture showing at least the surface of the heart here. In a few other slides, we'll take a look at some of the interior structures in the heart. And I have at the bottom here kind of a list of all of the different structures that eventually you do need to know about for Science 30. So the names of them, and we'll talk about where they are and what their function is. So there are 4 different heart chambers. So the chambers of the heart you can think of as these cavities that blood enters into and then it is pumped out of. So these are muscular walled chambers. They are referred to as the ventricles and the atria. When we talk about in each individual atria, there's a right and a left, and they are referred to as the atrium, the right and the left atrium. So these are all, again, muscular walls, but what we'll find is that the ventricles, they are much thicker, much more muscular, much stronger, can generate much more force than the atria. And because of that, we refer to them as the pumping chambers, whereas the atria we also refer to as the receiving chambers. So blood will come into the atria and then it always, or at least should always, unless something is wrong, flow into the ventricles from there. So if we take a look at our surface of the heart, always orient yourself in terms of what is the top, what is the bottom. That's pretty straightforward. Pointy at the bottom, it's called the apex. All of the blood vessels, they go into or come out of the top of the heart. Most of the mass of the heart is made up of the ventricles. The atria, in fact, are quite small. They only make up, maybe 10 to 20% of the volume of the heart. So where we find the atria are at the top, ventricles down at the bottom. In terms of the right or the left, when you're looking at the heart, it's always as if you're taking a look at it on someone else. So what is the right-hand side of the screen is in fact the left side of the heart. What is the left side of the screen is the right side of the heart. And that is kind of important because if you don't figure that out right from the start or remember that, everything is kind of flipped around. Everything is going to be backwards from that point on. The left and the right and the front and the back, that is a little bit more difficult to kind of figure out without cutting into the heart, but that is the orientation on this one here. And we'll see a little bit more clear when we look into the heart, how you can actually determine what is the left compared to the right side. So back to the different chambers then, the atria are actually these two right here. So I'll circle this one. So this one is the right atrium, and this little one here is going to be the left atrium. So very small volume of the heart compared to all of the rest of it here. So all of the rest of it, those are the ventricles. And this is kind of the dividing line between them right here that I'm trying to highlight, where we see those red and blue blood vessels and all this sort of yellowish fatty tissue. That is essentially the dividing line between the right and the left side. But this is really kind of misleading, the orientation that it's showing here, because in fact, what we'll see is that the overall volume of the entire left side of the heart, the ventricle, is considerably bigger than the right side. In fact, the cavities contain the same amount of blood and pump the same amount of blood, but there's a significant difference in terms of the thickness of the walls, the left ventricle being much thicker than the right ventricle. Valves we can't actually see in this picture. You can't see the valves until you actually cut into the heart, but there are valves between that atria and the ventricle. So there will be one between, for example, the right atrium and the right ventricle, another one between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and also the exits out of the heart, out of the ventricles. So one exit out of the left side of the heart is into this blood vessel here. There will be a valve in that location. And this one here, there will also be a valve in that location. And again, we'll see that in some subsequent slides. For Science 30, you don't actually need to know the names of these specific valves. I will be referring to them now, and I will use these names, and they are called the right and left atrioventricular valves, or AV valves, because they are between the atria and the ventricles. The other ones are the exits out of the ventricles, and they are called the semilunar valves. You might see some other names as well, some older names. The atrioventricular are also referred to as the bi and tricuspid, and the semilunar also referred to as the pulmonary and aortic valves. But these are the names that we will go with when I am talking about the valves. 5 different blood vessels that you do need to know the names of. So 2 of these are veins and 3 of them are arteries. Veins always carry blood back to the heart. So that includes the vena cava, and the vena cava includes this one here that we see up above and this one down below. In both cases, the blood is going into the right atrium, and we'll take a look at that blood flow. Pulmonary artery carries blood away from the right side, and it goes toward the lungs. This one right here is going away from the right ventricle, and that's the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary veins bring the blood back from the lungs to the left side of the heart. So right in here, those 2 and these 2 over here, coming from the right lung, it all goes into the left atrium. The aorta is this big red arching blood vessel that we see here. It is an artery carrying blood away from the left ventricle. That is the largest artery in your body. And coronary arteries were these ones, these red and blue lines on the surface of the heart. They deliver oxygen and nutrients to the heart muscle itself. And we can see a few more of them right here, wiggling along the surface of the heart. So those are all of the major structures of the heart that you need to know. The last one we can't see at all until we cut into the heart, and that's the septum. But where we would find it is at this dividing line between the right and the left ventricles. So I'll show you an animation in a second here, but let's use this picture to take a look at some of the interior structures of the heart. So now we've cut into it, and what we're looking into, I'll just use some abbreviations here. So again, this is going to be the right side of the heart. This is going to be the left side of the heart. So the atria are these ones at the top. So this one here, I'll just put RA for the right atrium, LA for the left atrium. Down below, always down below are the ventricles. So this is the right ventricle, and this is the left ventricle. So now that we have cut in, we can see the thickness of the walls. Take a look at the thickness of the walls of the atria compared to the thickness of the ventricles. Much thicker ventricles. Not only that, but take a look at the left ventricle thickness, the wall, compared to the right. In fact, it's much more thicker on the left side than on the right side. So once you cut into the heart, or you can actually tell before you cut into the heart just by feeling the ventricles, which one is thicker and which one is thinner. But this does tell us the thicker wall, that is now the left side. We can also see the valves here. So these blue lines, those are the valves, so I'll circle them. This is one of the valves between the atria and the ventricles. That is the right atrioventricular valve. This is the other atrioventricular valve. And these 2 here, those are the 2 semilunar valves, and those are the exits out of the ventricles. You do need to know about blood flow, and we're going to see the blood flow in this animation, but what we'll see is it should always be going again from atria down into the ventricles, and then out through the ventricles into an artery going through the semilunar valves. We can see the septum now very nicely here. Okay, thick wall separating the 2. That is the septum. And we can see also now the 4 different blood vessels fairly clearly. So going into the right atrium, I'll just put VC for vena cava. Above, bringing blood from the head and the upper part of the body. And the superior vena cava, that's the superior vena cava. The one below is also the vena cava, inferior vena cava, and that brings the blood from the lower part of the body. So vein, that is a vein. Veins always carry blood back to the heart. So on the other side, we also have a vein here, carrying the blood into the left atrium. So this one from the left lung and this one from the right lung, they're carrying blood back to the heart. They are veins. Blood vessels associated with the lungs, they're called pulmonary. So these are the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. This one here and this one, they're going toward the lungs, here and here. So they are also pulmonary, but now they're pulmonary arteries. And the last one, this one here, is the aorta, largest artery, thickest walled blood vessel under the greatest force and the highest pressure, highest velocity out of any of the blood vessels. That is the aorta, directly connected to the most muscular part of the heart, which is the left ventricle. So we're going to see this animation here, and they're going to use some different colors. The blue color that they're using represents the blood, which is deoxygenated, and that just means it's low in oxygen. Okay, blood is not really blue in color, it's all red. There are different tinges of red, and the deoxygenated blood is kind of a purplish reddish color. It's deoxygenated, which means it's low in oxygen. It needs to go to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. Where is it coming from? All of the cells and tissues and organs in the body that have taken that oxygen out of the blood, and they're using that oxygen for cellular respiration. Where you see the red color, that's blood that's coming from the lungs, and it's going to now the cells, tissues, and organs in your body, and it's delivering that oxygen. So this is now high oxygen, or what is called the oxygenated blood. So let's go ahead and take a look at this animation. There is some audio that goes along with it, but we can't hear it, unfortunately, when I play it making these lessons, so I'm just going to have to kind of walk you through it. So we see exactly the same thing here. So there are some nice things about this. It's quite simplified. These valves will remain open the entire time. In fact, that is not the case, and we'll see that with a subsequent animation. So that is not really true. What they're also going to do is they're going to start with blood coming through the vena cava and into the right atrium. So that's really nice for tracing the flow of blood, but it doesn't come into the right side first and then later the left side. It is all at the same time. It is simultaneous. Blood comes into both atria at the same time, goes into both ventricles at the same time, is pumped through both or out of both ventricles at the same time. So let's just take a look at this for a second. Again, the blue is representing blood that's low in oxygen. It's coming from the body. It's going to the lungs. Red color is oxygenated blood. It's coming from the lungs and going to the body. So this is kind of fast. Let's kind of go through stepwise here. You do need to know, yes, stepwise blood flow through the heart. So you do need to know blood goes from this structure to this structure to this structure. So this is what that is going to show. So we start off here, and it could start anywhere, but in this animation, it's starting off with the vena cava. We can see the arrows here. Blood is coming from the vena cava, which is the largest diameter, internal diameter blood vessel in your body. It is a vein, the largest vein in your body. Brings blood into the right atrium. From the right atrium, yes, there is a little bit of contraction, but for the most part, it just flows through this valve, which isn't open all the time, but it's going to flow through the valve and into the right ventricle. And from there, now that right ventricle is going to contract and forcibly move this blood through this semilunar valve into the pulmonary arteries, carrying blood away from the heart. So this is an artery that carries deoxygenated blood. So not all arteries carry oxygenated blood. Most of them do, but this one doesn't. So that is not our definition of an artery. The definition of an artery is carrying blood away from the heart, and that is exactly what this does. So it's going to the lungs. What is it doing in the lungs? Well, let's take a look. We have this color transition. As the blood in the lungs, it's getting rid of carbon dioxide that you exhale. It's picking up oxygen that you inhale, and now we have oxygenated blood that needs to go from both the left and the right lung through these blood vessels, which are carrying blood back to the heart. So they are veins. They are pulmonary veins because they're associated with the lungs. So from both lungs, it goes into the left atrium, oxygenated blood. Just like we saw on the right side, it's going to go through the atrioventricular valve. It's going to go into the ventricle, and now we have this very, very strong and muscular left ventricle. Why is this one stronger and more muscular? Whereas the right ventricle only needs to pump the blood to the lungs, which is right on either side of the heart. For the left ventricle, it needs to pump the blood against the resistance of all of the blood vessels everywhere in your body, all the way down to your feet and all the way up against gravity to your head. So that's why it does require a much stronger muscle, generating more force, more pressure, and more velocity. So we see the blood being forced out through the semilunar valve on the left side into the aorta, and this is going to deliver it to all of the cells, tissues, and organs in the body. And then we just get back to where we started in the first place to complete the cycle. So this is also somewhat referred to as the cardiac cycle, the cycling of blood, but there's a little bit more to this cardiac cycle as well that you do need to know about. So if we take a look at this one, it does show the cardiac cycle, and as it says here, it is the cyclical pattern of blood flow, heart chamber filling, followed by emptying, and the valves alternating between opening and closing. Remember I said that previous animation wasn't exactly correct. Those valves are not open all of the time. They will go through this cyclical pattern. Important terms for you to know: diastole is what we see in this picture. What is going on? Well, we can see that blood is coming into both atria at the same time, and immediately it's flowing through the open atrioventricular valves and into the ventricles. So what we have is the heart filling, and in particular, we have the ventricles that are relaxed and they are filling with blood. That is what is going on during diastole. Notice that the semilunar valves, they are closed. If we go on to the next picture at the lower right-hand side, what's going on here? Well, now take a look at those atrioventricular valves. They're going to slam shut. And when they actually slam shut, you can hear this if you're using a stethoscope. So that is what we refer to as the first heart sound, the closing of those atrioventricular valves. Why do they close? Well, because now the ventricles are contracting, and these are one-way doors. They only allow blood to go from the atria into the ventricles. So when you contract the ventricles, those one-way doors are going to slam shut, but that's also going to now force open the exit out of the ventricles, which are the semilunar valves. So this is what is going on during systole. Systole, we have ventricular contraction. They empty. The ventricles are going to be emptying, and they're going to be going into their corresponding arteries, which would be the pulmonary arteries coming from the right side and the aorta that is coming from the left side, from the left ventricle. And then this cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. So if someone is at rest, the average heart rate and the average for this cycle would be about 60 to 70 times per minute. So the heart sounds that I mentioned, they are the closing of the two sets of valves, and the two different heart sounds. The first one is referred to as a lub sound, the second one as a dub sound, and they do correspond to the closing of first of all. And again, it is the closing. You don't hear the opening of the valves, you hear the closing of the valves. So first it's the closing of the valves between the atria and ventricles, and secondly, it's the closing of the valves on the exit out of the ventricles, these semilunar valves. So this picture here is showing us, again, just the cardiac cycle, this sequence of events. So if we start with where we do have here as number one, so number one in the picture here, atrial and ventricular diastole. So this is the filling. We really just need to focus on the ventricles, the filling of the ventricles. We can see blood again coming in from both the right side and the left side at the same time, flowing directly down into the ventricles. Minor contraction of the atria is going to aid in moving it down into the ventricles. No heart sound is heard here. Semilunar valves remain closed. So now, once the blood is in the ventricles, now those ventricles are going to contract. So now we're going to switch over from diastole to systole. Once there is enough pressure that develops, we're going to have the AV valves that close and the semilunar valves that are going to now open. So this one here is now going to be that lub sound. Sometimes it's two B's that they show, the lub sound. And then when the blood is forced out, those valves are going to close as well. And the closing of those valves is going to result in the second heart sound or the dub sound, whether it's with the 1 or the 2 B's in either case. So this again shows the cardiac cycle, and again, very quick, and this would be on average about 60 to 70 times per minute when someone is at rest. So let's take a look at this picture again here. I'm going to play you another animation, only this time it's going to be more accurate because we're going to see blood going into both sides at the same time, and we're also going to see the valves alternating through this opening and closing. We can't hear the heart sounds, but they will indicate on here with the words lub and dub when those heart sounds would be taking place. So a lot to follow on this one. There is really a lot going on. Again, first of all, note that everything on the right side of the heart is blue. That deals with oxygenated blood. Everything in the left, or sorry, deoxygenated blood. Everything on the left is dealing with the oxygenated blood. So it's really, really quick, and this would be about an average heart rate, and it's kind of difficult to pick out when the valves are opening and when the valves are closing. So let's go through this one stepwise as well. So here we're starting not only at the vena cava, blood coming into the right side, but also at the pulmonary veins, blood coming into the left side. So comes into, yes, both atria at the same time. All valves are closed at this point, but then blood is immediately going to flow from the atria down into the ventricles through the atrioventricular valves at exactly the same time. Once they are full, muscles are going to contract, the ventricles that is, and that pressure is going to slam shut the AV valves, and now we can see that is the first heart sound. Now we continue through this, pressure develops, the semilunar valves open up, blood is forced out. Once most of the blood is forced out, there's going to be a little bit of backflow from the aorta and from the pulmonary arteries, and that backflow is going to slam shut the semilunar valves, and that is our second heart sound. Now the blood is going to be delivered through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, through the aorta to the rest of the body, and eventually it's just going to make its way back again to where we started once again in the first place. So that is the entire cardiac cycle that we are now seeing here. So the two different circulations that you also need to know the names of for Science 30 are pulmonary circulation. We already saw that pulmonary has anything to do with the lungs. So blood that is going to the lungs and blood that's coming back from the lungs, that is the pulmonary circulation. So this would be deoxygenated blood that's coming from the right ventricle going toward the lungs, picks up oxygen, and then it's returned to the left atrium. So in this picture that we see here, this at the top is representing all of the pulmonary circulation. Down at the bottom, it's showing the systemic circulation, and that is everything except for the blood that is going to the lungs, and that also includes blood that is going to the coronary arteries. So again, if we take a look at some of the details that we're seeing here, we can look into the heart. We can see the two atria, right and left atrium. We can see the two ventricles here. Arrows are showing the blood flow that's going through the heart, again, which absolutely you need to know. We can see the names of most of the blood vessels. So vena cava, bringing the blood into the right side. It doesn't look like it has a name, but this one here, that would be the pulmonary veins, bringing the blood into the left side. Pulmonary arteries take the blood away from the right side, and the aorta takes the blood away from the left side. It also points out some very useful information here as well in terms of the pressure that is developed inside of these blood vessels directly attached to the heart. So again, there are 4 of them. Remember that the left ventricle is the strongest, the most muscular. So it's through the aorta that we have the highest pressure out of any of the blood vessels in your body, and for sure out of those 4 that are associated with the heart. The blood pressure of arteries is always going to be higher than the blood pressure in veins. So the other arteries that we have here are the ones that are sending blood to the lungs. So here the pressure is high, but it's nowhere near as high as the pressure that is in the aorta, but we will put that as number 2. Blood that's coming back from the lungs, we'll put this one as number 3. And the lowest of all, barely kind of trickling back, has to be aided by venous valves and contraction of your muscles. and that would be the vena cava, bringing blood back from the lower part of your body and the upper part of your body as well. So this is kind of the ranking in terms of those 4 different blood vessels directly attached to the heart and the blood pressures associated with them. Just a little bit on the electrical activity of the heart. The heart is muscle, the heart does contract, but it needs to be given some stimulation in order to contract. And certainly it can receive messages from your nervous system, your brain, and it can receive messages from hormones as well, like epinephrine or adrenaline, but it can also contract on its own. And that's because of what is referred to as the body's pacemaker, which is right here. Oops, sorry, this one right here. A sinoatrial node. And the sinoatrial node is the pacemaker, and it essentially gives your heart muscle a shock. And if you shock the muscle, it contracts. And it shocks the muscle on average about 60 or 70 times per minute at rest, and that's why that is the average heart rate. So once you shock the muscle, these arrows are showing that first of all, we get the atria to contract. Again, it's not that much, but they have to contract first, and then a little bit of a delay before the ventricles contract and force the blood out through the semilunar valves. We can measure the electrical activity of the heart if you've ever had an electrocardiogram or ECG done on you. That is measuring the electrical activity in your heart. So it involves placing at least 3 electrodes on your chest, sometimes on your limbs as well, creating kind of a triangle here to measure the electrical activity in the heart, and it produces something that looks like this. This is a graph that we would get from an electrocardiogram. So if you are a trained cardiologist, you can take a look at this and determine if there is some sort of problem with the electrical activity in the heart. Sometimes things go wrong with the heart. So in this case here, if someone has what is referred to as ventricular fibrillation, so they collapse and the heart just isn't contracting as it should. The ventricles, instead of having these forceful contractions, they're just kind of quivering, and that is this ventricular fibrillation. So what it looks like, this is what a normal ECG should look like. This is ventricular fibrillation. So this is not good at all, and the heart is not effectively pumping blood out. So this person is going to end up dying unless they can reset the electrical activity of the heart, and that involves giving the heart an electrical shock. So in this picture here, what we have are these 2 paddles, these 2 metal plates and panels that are giving this person an electrical shock. But anyone can now do this because we have what are referred to as automated external defibrillators. They have these in our school. They have them in malls, they have them in businesses all around the city, and they provide all of the instructions to the person that is helping someone that has collapsed and might be dying if they are in ventricular fibrillation. So they do have these pads here, these sticky pads that go on the chest. They actually tell you exactly where to stick those on the chest as well. And then the computer inside here will analyze, determine if there is ventricular fibrillation taking place. And if that is the case, it'll ask you to go ahead and push the green button and deliver a shock. And hopefully that's enough to reset the normal ECG pattern and save this person's life.